Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. I am your host, Jen Karsner. I am so excited to be here with everyone today and really introduce you guys to the ultimate student connection, the evolution of education marketing in 2021. First, let me start by introducing who we are. We are Local IQ, and Local IQ is actually the digital marketing expert amongst communities with deep roots in over 260 communities across the country. And it's really our passion to help local businesses and communities grow. And what's incredible about Local IQ is we have uniquely engaged local audiences, industry leading technology, deep digital marketing expertise, and insights from over 300,000 clients across the United States. And we are so excited to be working with several of our clients. And of course, for those of you that don't know who we are, we're happy to introduce ourselves, of course. Today on the agenda, we are going to be speaking to three incredible speakers, Kristen Manders, Brenda Brodsky, and Heather Strayer. We're going to be talking all about reigniting hope and passion, getting to the good stuff where we talk about creative advertising, and of course, aligning with the student journey. But before we get started and I continue, I want to make sure that everybody on the call is on the same page with where to find everything. So the first thing that I want you guys to do, if you've been on my webinars before, you know I really love questions and interactions from the audience. So for the first thing I want you to do is find that chat box at the top of your screen and do me a favor and go ahead and write where in the country you are from. I will give you a second. Make sure that when you're doing it, you select at the bottom to, and that it's to all panelists and attendees. That way attendees can also see your comments and remarks as well. So you can switch that by just changing up the little tab and selecting who you want to be messaging to. Another thing that I'd love for you guys to get familiar with is the Q&A portion of on your screen as well. If you see that little Q and A, let me know. That's where you can submit questions, because at the very end of this webinar, we are going to be doing a Q&A. So you want to stay tuned to the very end, because I promise you the good stuff is at the end. And also because we're going to be answering all of those questions, and we want to make sure that we answer as many for you as possible. Last but not least, this will be recorded. So for any reason, if you have somebody that you want to share this with, we will be sending out a copy of the recording along with a corresponding workbook that does reflect the presentation today. So you will get part of the presentation with even more details and things for you to work through, as well as a recording of the webinar as well for you to fall back and watch on. So let's go ahead and get started. So we all know on the call that the current global pandemic has really touched every part of our lives, making us rethink how we interact with each other, where we invest our time, and where we invest our money. This also resulted in students rethinking their plan for the future, causing them to hit pause on their educational pursuits, which really led to declines in enrollment and increases in transfers and gap years, which it's the way of our world, right? So this pause, it will likely course correct naturally over time, but there is a lasting change that did take place. Now there's a new standard for how we communicate and connect with each other. We have hybrid learning, we have virtual tours, and a need to see a return on investment from degrees versus new concepts. There's also new standards for students considering education beyond high school. And these new standards really need to be the new standard for how we approach higher education marketing. And that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. So without further ado, let me go ahead and bring on Kristen Manders, who's going to be talking all about reigniting hope and passion. Hi, Kristen. How are you today?
Great. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm so excited to have you here. So Kristen, we know things have changed drastically, as I mentioned, right? Students hit the pause button, but what we don't know is why, and how do we get them to move forward?
Right. We can start by acknowledging that we all saw a lot of change this past year. It wasn't just students. We had no other option than to embrace technology as a workaround for hanging out with friends and family and connecting with our colleagues and business partners and entertainment. And that was the same for higher education. People researching schools, they couldn't go on campus tours anymore. Students couldn't go to classes or appointments with campus resources. The student engagement we used to foster on campus had to be built through those virtual connections and digital content. In addition to that, the economy saw a tremendous strain. There were 23 million jobs lost from January to April last year, with 54%, belonging to people with some education beyond high school. So education did not guarantee safety or security in such an extraordinary circumstance, which shook a lot of confidence in people. For many, what this led to was a change in plans. We all kind of made pivots last year, but for people who are considering education, they really had to ask themselves, is this the right time? Can I still afford this? Will I learn as much virtually? And ultimately, 73% of students actually changed their college plans as a result of all these new circumstances and questions.
So I know that Gannett did a study with Local IQ and earlier this year to understand how students change their college plans. Can you talk a little bit, I guess, on the next slide as to what kind of changes did we see?
Definitely. We saw that people are delaying their school choices and spending more time researching their options. On the plus side, that gives marketers more time to connect with potential students. The bad news is that it also gave prospective students time to second guess their plans and decisions. So during this time, students really closely weighed the value of an online education compared to in-person education, with some students even asking for discounted tuition because they were no longer getting the same in-person value that they had expected.
Wow,
and
that's kind of huge, huh?
Yeah, it was tremendous. It was tremendous. Some students and their families, of course, then had to weigh costs more heavily due to lost income sources. And a lot of people question whether education really provides stability for their future. And our study showed that different generations tended to respond a little differently. So we saw traditional age students delaying their decisions by taking gap years or changing schools. We saw technical and trade students lose their faith in outcomes a little bit because so many jobs were lost. And then conversely, we have the optimistic graduate degree seekers who really leaned into education. They saw the longer term potential. So we had, again, traditional students thinking, will I get the same experience? Can I still afford this? The non-traditional audience exploring what career paths offer career stability and protect against pandemic economic hardships. And then the graduate students were the optimists saying, you know, education has opened opportunities for me before, and it will again.
Okay, so I have a few questions on this one, Kristen. So this information definitely aligns with the overall enrollment trends from last year too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We saw a lot of decreases in the technical and community college enrollment, and then graduate was one of the only areas we saw a lot of growth.
Okay, and so what can we do, or like everyone on the call as marketers, what can we do to turn this around?
We really have to take control of the narrative a little bit more, Jen. We have to answer those burning questions, right? So last year, Georgetown University's Center on Education and the Workforce predicted that 70% of jobs would require education beyond high school by 2027. And they based these projections on things like automation and technology shifts, and then also the earning potential for jobs for people with or without education. So they estimated that 17% will require some college, no degree, which was down a little bit from their previous projection. They also estimated that 13% will require associate's degrees, which was up 10% since their last projection. And 40% of jobs would require a bachelor's degree or above, which really didn't change since previous projections.
Okay, so education beyond high school is what we're looking at as a minimum requirement for most career paths today. But we also see articles that say things like Gen Z wants to skip college and go right into the workforce, which I see a lot, right? And it kind of makes me wonder, like, what does this mean? What is it?
Yeah, absolutely. There is a knowledge gap, and we must educate people about the types of degrees and certifications that are needed for various career paths. We can help them understand what functions are in demand, and in many instances, we can help people understand how degrees are transferable between different career paths.
Okay.
Whatever our school's need is, whatever our promises for students, and whatever our students need, we can provide the information that will fuel their plans and solidify their decisions. Midwestern State University, as you see on the screen, responded head on with last year's circumstances.
Okay.
They used content to provide immediate answers to those people who were delaying decisions. They were a thought leader. They were a resource to people who are rethinking their program of choice or considering a new career path. We often think about providing this type of information on our website or from an academic advisor, but there are so many more opportunities to inspire students earlier on, and we need to take advantage of those.
Okay, so I think we're going to look at that right now, right?
Yeah, so what kind of causes that inspiration? And ultimately, it's speaking to what people are interested. People want this kind of information more than ever. This information regarding, available jobs. In the study that we conducted, we actually compared the top factors that drove college choice in 2017 to now in 2021. Before the pandemic, there was a growing interest in student outcomes and job placements, but the events of last year just launched job placements to the very top of the list and cemented that into the minds of prospective students. Most people are thinking and planning for the longer term vision of their future, and we'll continue to see a lot of pragmatic decision making from most students.
Okay, so students are thinking more practically about their education pursuit is what we're seeing. So let me ask you this: what other areas are affected by that? What other areas are affected by that mentality that they have?
Yeah, everyone has increased their use of technology for entertainment and news gathering, and every age group has had to embrace virtual connections. And overall, this increased tech use is a new standard for how we work and build relationships. It's a new standard for convenience and flexibility. So as we're getting more practical, we're looking for things like convenience and flexibility, right? Talk about work-life balance and that type of a thing. So the pandemic forced most educators, of course, to adapt from that in-person to virtual learning. And with the pandemic nearing an end, we will have a new expectation moving forward. There's no going back. Technology can create a more efficient use of our time, and our study showed us that hybrid learning options are the new expectation for students of all ages. We've used the term digital natives to define Gen Z for a really long time. So technology integration wasn't new to them. Building connections virtually wasn't new to them.
Okay.
But now nearly everyone has connected virtually for one reason or another, providing all age groups have the skill and ability to move into the virtual world.
Okay, so I know that before we continue, I know that when we were talking and before we actually did the webinar, we were building content and talking, and I talked a little bit about how, is this virtual world going to stick here? Is it going to stick around? I talked to you about, some of the benefits that it's been for my family with me being a single parent, my son's dad living out of the state, him being able to attend school here in Texas, but being able to do it virtually so he can see his dad as well. So obviously not the exact same as a high school student or as a college student, but very similar, kind of gives you more of, like what you said, that efficiency, right? And with what we're seeing, my son knows how to work Zoom better than I do, and he's only 9 years old. So I can't imagine how, Gen Z feels with technology and really wanting us to hone in on that. Would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. And it'll go beyond Gen Z. Every student right now has been adapting to that virtual environment and learning virtually throughout the pandemic. So at this incredibly young age, they've adapted to that, and they're more equipped for these hybrid learning environments. And it's just going to be something that they demand.
Okay, cool. So we know that students want job placement and hybrid learning more than ever, but what helps distinguish one school from another, would you say?
We distinguish ourselves very early on in the student's journey, maybe even before they know want to major in. We
Okay.
know that students consider more than 3 schools at the start of their journey, and most end up enrolled in one of those institutions. So while job placement and opportunity might lead to the final decision,
Mhm.
the culture, the brand of the school is why people add a school to their consideration set. So there's still a really important balance between giving them what's practical and inspiring them. Students connect with and remember a college for different reasons, remember. So younger students still see the value that the college experience provides, whereas older students are looking still at that convenience and flexibility. But at the earliest moments of their journey, each generation of students is considering their own unique needs. They're thinking about college through the lens of their own universe, be it athletics or STEM programs or student life. So it's important that schools build the right brand foundation by personalizing messages for different audiences and interests.
Okay.
That's what's going to help the school become this top of mind, familiar brand that is well known in the universe of the student.
Okay, great. So this was excellent information. Can you kind of like bring it full circle for us before we move on to the next section?
Yeah. As higher ed marketers, it's our job to inspire people to reach for a better future for themselves. We need to give them the information that they need to make that plan. We also need to highlight the convenience and flexibility that we offer now that we have so much technology integrated into the college experience. And finally, we need to create a consistent brand experience that will translate between online and on campus. Whether a student chooses your institution all boils down to the brand, the culture, or the vibe of your school. We have probably heard from everyone on this call when we can get a student to take a tour. 9 times out of 10, they enroll. That happens because historically, that's where the school's personality shines.
Okay.
The students feel the excitement of the tour guide. They get details about successful alumni. They hear about the innovative curriculum that will set them up for success. But in just 1 year, we've normalized virtual connections. So we can build on that foundation to make earlier connections with people researching schools.
I love it. Thank you so much, Kristen. I appreciate it. And we will talk to you at the end when we do our Q&A. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So now I want to go ahead and get to the good stuff with Brenda Brodsky. We're going to talk all about creative and branding, and this is personally one of my favorite sections. So getting to the good stuff, what does that mean to our educators? Tell me.
Yeah, that's it. So the good stuff. Thanks, Jen. And I like how this is your favorite part. Mine too. Pretty much what coming off of what Kristen has just shared with us, and that it's so critical to really know the insights of your modern day students, and what's on their mind, what's motivating them, how they're adapting. What do they look for when choosing a college? What's of value to them?
Sure.
The question kind of now gets to, when you're in front of them, what are you going to say, right? And that's the marketing, and that's the brand message, and I'm passionate about it, and I call it the good stuff. So that's what this is all about, of how to get to the good stuff. And this slide says how to tell your truth, and it's pivotal, because when you get to the good stuff, when you get to your brand messaging, you have to tell your truth. Great brands need to stand out, and ultimately they have to connect with their students, consumers, in our case, the students, right? But it has to be meaningful. And really that starts by telling your truth. And what I mean by that is, what is it that you have, your offerings, your experience different than anyone else, right? Whether it's one class, whether it's a year's worth of education, whether it's 6 years, what is your stake in the ground? What brand stake in the ground? You can look at what are your beliefs, your values, your uniqueness that you deliver to your students every single day. That's how we start to, pull up and out and start to tell your truth, and how we really kind of drill and get down to the good stuff. And we have this kind of technique, or there's a lot of influences, and looking at this crazy drawing, that can kind of help us all find our brand stake in the ground. And as you can see in the middle is our brand, right? But we start to see all the influences when you're starting to pull up and out your brand messaging. And of course, like you can see in there, Kristen mentioned the target, right? All the things she just walked us through is critical. What's on their mind, what are they looking for? But we also look at some things like, what's the current reputation, right? What's the word out there about brand in your school? That's pivotal. Like we might have to do damage control, don't know. You have to also look at the competition. What are they saying? What are they doing? Because we do want to drill down and be different than them, right? And then, even the what happens in the unique experience when your students set foot on campus, that very first day, or even in the virtual classroom, right? That hybrid learning. So there's a lot of things that we start to look at and we take into consideration when really getting to the good stuff and defining marketing and brand advertising. And you can see off to the right, there's this critical word, why, right? That's almost the secret sauce, because brands and messaging will always have the what, but the most important part is, why should I care? And that's where the emotional place comes in. And I think Kristen kind of articulated it as practical and inspiring. So we've got both the what and the why.
I think that that's really great. And something that I always say is, no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And I think that it's so important for a brand to really embody that, because too often we're trying to sell someone something, or sell a dream, or sell our services, or sell a product, that we often forget, hey, we're speaking to everyday people and we need to connect with them in a meaningful way and have that story really reflect what we do, so that there's compassion, it elicits some type of emotion, right?
Absolutely. I mean, that is great advertising. You have to connect both emotionally and rationally. And actually, on the next slide, I have one of my most favorite campaigns. This is from Y&R. I cannot take credit from it, but it's been out there for a while, but it's one of my favorite ones, and I wanted to share it with everybody because they brilliantly tapped right into the left brain and the right brain, the emotional and the rational, whilst trying to sell a car, right? So here it is. Nowhere do you even see a car, but what they do is they gave both sides of the brain a voice, and then by doing so, they said that driving a Mercedes does both. So, and fulfills upon both. So let me just read a little bit, because I know it's probably small for everyone to see. So I'll just read a little bit. The left brain, of course, is the rational. I am the left brain. I am a scientist, a mathematician. I love the familiar. I categorize. I'm accurate, linear, analytical, strategic. I am practical. You get the point. Mm-hmm. And then the right brain comes in and says, I am right brain. I am creativity, a free spirit. I am passion, yearning, sensuality. I am the sound of roaring laughter. But again, beautiful, beautiful campaign. And it really taps into, what great advertising does, and using the left and the right and emotional, the what and the why. And I just love it. So wanted to share that with you. But I guess, what does that really mean for higher education, right?
Right.
So again, remember, we're trying to drill down and get to the good stuff and find what's uniquely yours and your brand. And as marketers, we hear this a lot from you all, that this is part of your differentiators, that you're affordable, that there's flexibility, you have high job placement, you've got hands-on experience in small classrooms. So I hope, and I think every one of you on the call right now are probably nodding like, yes, those are ours. Yes, yes. But really what we need to do is we need to push through these common terms that we hear all the time and really drill down into why. What does it mean for each and every one of these little points? Why do our students care?
Yeah, and so this is what we hear as marketers, right? And I guess I would ask you, what is it that we should be understanding from this?
Yeah, I mean, you can take, and this is what we do all the time. We take each point and we drill it down and we align it with, again, like I said, what does flexibility really mean to the students? This is what we really want. And it could mean I just put some bullet points, some things like, the flexibility really allows for accessible online options, evening and weekend classes. Really cool. That's very specific. Flexibility could also be a self-paced degree, programs that begin at the beginning of every month, so you get access to that. That's flexibility.
Okay.
And it could be something as like full degrees can be obtained entirely online. Remember how Kristen was mentioning how critical that is.
Sure.
So that's some of the drill down language that we would pull up and out that really start to align what makes, what you have, and then why should I care? Even for something like the hands-on learning, that sounds great, but let's keep going, right? So what does that really mean? You could use language like work side by side with industry leaders, or it's like the real life training that you crave. And then if you actually have named your hands-on learning programs, that's great. So put it out there. Like, you could actually identify that it's credited, ready to work programs across 26 degrees. The more specific you can be, and always align the benefit with them, with the topic is critical.
Great.
And then the last one is, we talked about that example of a small classroom. I guarantee everybody says that, but that's almost like the price of entry nowadays. And you really got to drill that down. That message is important, but the takeaway might be something like real connections between, the teachers and the students. Or you could even say, you're not a number, we care about you.
Sure.
Or another way to transcribe that about the why is that we teach our passion. And that's what you get out of this small classroom. So it's just drilling down into those messages that really allows you to get to the good stuff and really pull up and differentiate your brand, than anyone else. And that's the critical part that we wanted to share today.
Yeah, and then turning that into something that's also visually stimulating as well, right?
That's what we do too. Exactly. That was, that's the hard part, is drilling down and getting the message. And then the easy part for us is making it look good. So again, we just wanted to share and, with you some examples basically of how we've brought basically some brands to life, with great messaging, sticking within brand guidelines. Sometimes we do, sometimes we push the limits of brand guidelines, but just great, empowering, very short to the point messages and campaigns that really, run the gamut across all platforms. Again, once you get it up and you get your campaign, consistency is key, as you can see.
Yeah,
Just some
I mean, I
beautiful
love
work.
that. I love that I know at Local IQ, we do a really great job of keeping that consistency from, what is it going to look like on a phone? What is it going to look like on a computer? Making sure we're meeting people exactly where they are when they're achieving their touch points, right? And I know that Heather is going to talk about what those touch points are in our next aligning with the student journey. But I love that the branding on these is also really fresh, young, lots of vibrant colors, things that are going to draw attention to a student's eye. And again, it's that one key differentiator is really like meeting people where they are, knowing who your audience is, knowing your why, knowing your what, and really finding ways to have your brain's DNA stand out amongst the rest.
Absolutely. We try and make it look easy.
But it's not.
It's not.
Can you bring us full circle, Brenda, before we move on with Heather?
Of course, of course. So at the end of the day, you're, trying to advocate to tell your truth. And really what that means is just to pull up and out what makes your brand unique. And then always, just push past and through the obvious, because that's when you start to get real language that really aligns with your students. And then always, again, I always, I call it the why, but it's basically, why should I care? Why should your students care that you have this attribute? And if you stick to it's kind of like a recipe. If you stick to that, you'll pull up and out and you'll get to the good stuff. And hopefully your brand will thrive in a very competitive arena.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brenda. I appreciate you. And we will talk to you in a little bit during our Q&A. Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay. Bye, Jen.
All right. And last but absolutely not least, I am going to be inviting on Heather Strayer, who's going to be talking all about aligning with the student journey. Hi, Heather. How are you?
I'm good, Jen. How are you?
Good. So this is great advice about how to stand apart and speak to your strengths in really ways that really matter to the potential student, right? So, but once you have that story crafted, I guess the question that I'm sure is on everybody's mind, including mine, is where do you need to tell it? We all know the student journey is complex, but Heather, how long does it really take a student to decide on their education path? Is it months? Is it years? Is it weeks? Do they see our school one time and go, oh, yep, I'm going to apply? What are we seeing?
Yeah, that's it.
Nice.
We all wish that, right? As the first time they saw it, they fell in love with us and wanted to apply right then. But actually the student journey, so it is complex. And it's interesting that there's all these touch points, and some of them actually start before students start researching. But the research phase, where they really start digging in and weighing out their options and trying to understand what school they're going to ultimately choose, typically takes anywhere from a couple of months to a year. Okay. In that study that we conducted as Local IQ and Gannett, we did find something really interesting this past year, that in 2017, the number of students who took between 6 to 12 months to decide, that's almost doubled now. And a lot of that really comes down to all of those students who pressed pause on their education. And so it really represents that 35% who said that they're now taking between 6 and 12 months. That represents pent-up demand. And we're starting to see that. We're starting to see, as vaccinations increase and markets reopen and schools are communicating what their plans for fall are, we're seeing an increase in applications across a lot of schools. But that means that as marketers, we've got to be prepared for those students, and we have to make sure that we're in their selection process and their enrollment journey.
Okay, so when we look at the journey today versus a couple years ago, do we see any really big differentiators, any big differences? What does today's journey look like versus what it looked like then, I guess?
Yeah, so it is complex and unique today, but to be honest, it has been for several years.
Yeah,
I think we all know that consumer journeys over the past decade, I think probably every time we look at consumer journey, it's different than it was 6 months ago or a year ago. And that a lot of that has to do with technology and platforms. And when you think about our potential students, we talked about earlier digital natives, and a lot of our undergraduates now are coming from that generation of digital natives. So they've always had access to information. They expect to find what they're looking for quickly, and they're quick to adopt and adapt to new technology. So when you think about all the platforms they engage on a daily basis, Google, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok, Snapchat, your own school website, just the list goes on and on. And so we need to think about what are all the different ways that a student can potentially interact with our school and our brand, and make sure that we're connecting throughout that journey and helping them find what they need quickly and conveniently. And we also need to make sure that we build awareness before they really start out on their research.
Okay. And so why is that? Why is building that awareness really important, I guess?
Yeah, so Kristen mentioned earlier that most students start out with just a couple of schools in mind. So we have to build that awareness and trust very early on. At the time that they first start thinking about college, we also have to make sure that we're affecting influencers who may be helping them build their shortlist. The reality is that most students start out their research with just 2 schools in mind. 1 in 3 have 2 schools in mind. 60% of students have a list of just 2 to 4 schools, and 75% of students say that they end up enrolling at one of the schools that was on their initial consideration list. So you have to be on the short list if you want to get the enrollment.
Okay, so as marketers, we understand that awareness is super important as part of the journey, but where do we need to focus those efforts? Where are today's students learning about school before and during their research phase? I think is what we all kind of want to know. Where do we go? What are they looking for? How do we get there? How do we connect? It's so many pieces.
Yeah, there's so many potential information sources. And I always like to look at it from the standpoint of where are the areas where we control the narrative? What are those areas that we own? So that's things like, our own website, social media pages, the videos that we have out. And we see students going more and more frequently directly to a school's website to find out more about them. In person or increasingly virtual school visits, those are really important. We talked earlier about how schools often tell us that if they can get the student to visit the campus in person, they can get the enrollment. So you have to think about what is it that they're experiencing during that in-person visit that makes them choose your school. And then you have to make sure that all of the interactions that they have with your staff, your recruiters, your admissions counselors, that should all reflect that brand and that experience. And then all of your marketing messages also need to have that brand. So you need to tie your brand to your brand promise and make sure that's reflected in their experience. Then we also have to think about areas that we don't control the message. So things like college guides, college ranking sites. So we don't always control the message. We can't control what people say about us, but we can earn exposure in those areas. So think about the college. You need to get to know what college guides are available in your area and what are students using. Okay. And then engage with those guides, whichever ones are the most used, most trusted. Make sure you're engaging with those. Make sure that if you can place content in them, because that way you can control, you get to paint the picture that you want the students to see. And then even things like US News, which is actually one of the items that, like the US News rankings, are listed as the most trusted of the resources that students used. Even that can be influenced because those rankings are influenced by the relationships we have with our peers. Okay. And we've seen schools who've launched successful marketing campaigns that had a goal specifically of elevating their reputation with peers to help lead to higher rankings.
Okay.
And then word of mouth, right? So teachers, guidance counselors, parents, friends, all of those people are going to have an influence. And so we want to make sure that the word of mouth is informed. So you need a good network of influencers. Make sure you're building good relationships with the high schools that feed into your colleges. Have a strong alumni network. I talked to a school earlier this week that they talked about their alumni being like rabid fans that just wanted everyone to go to the school. And if you can build that kind of that just ambassadorship where you've just got, graduates, alumni who are just so passionate about the school that they want everyone to be, go to their alma mater. There's so much to be said for that. And then college fairs, think about, so many schools do a really good job of using student ambassadors for like in-person tours. Consider engaging your student ambassadors as your envoys at the college fairs as well.
Okay, great. So I know we're going to talk about awareness and lead generation and engagement and what, versus one another, right? So that helps to set up how we can create great top of mind awareness and really helps get us on the short list. But what do marketers need to do once the student starts researching and narrowing down the short list to their final choice, I guess we would say?
Yeah, it really comes down to a really strong multi-touch point approach.
Okay.
So one of the things I've worked in media for a long time. I won't say how long, but one of the things I love about digital media is that the platforms move around through the funnel, right? So the journey for consumers is not linear, and the funnel doesn't always work in a linear way, and digital can play a part throughout. So for example, like paid search can be great at building awareness for someone who's just starting to gather info, but then it also can be really great for someone who has demonstrated intent when we use very specific keywords or we're promoting specific programs. And then you think about like social ad platforms, for example, they will create new ad types to drive, whether it's, you want engagement on your social page, your organic social page, or you want to drive people to your website. And social platforms often develop their ad types based on the goals that their advertisers have. So they're really great partners in that way. And these platforms are always evolving. So whether it's, interactive, targeted display, it's engaging video, it's that broad reaching social, it's really important for us to either have someone on staff or work with someone who understands all of the changes and guidelines on each platform.
Okay, so our local IQ study, it featured some questions specifically about ad recall and action, correct? So can you share some of the data? We have some of that data, right, that we're going to be looking at?
Yeah, I actually found this information really interesting. I think there were things we weren't surprised. We expected to see like an increase in notice on social media platforms because we have more of those and younger generations consume social media so much. But really, as marketers, it's important for us to understand that relationship between awareness and engagement, right? So where did they take notice and where did they take action?
Sure.
Some things like traditional media, you think about TV and billboards, they ranked high for awareness. People remember seeing it, there's an impact, but they weren't as effective at driving action. Okay. Email from the school was the most likely to drive action. But then when you look at platforms like YouTube and Instagram, they actually had the best combination of both awareness and action. So when you think about putting your plans together, you want to create effective buys. So look at the best combination based on your specific audience, what budget and resources you have, and use those tactics that are going to give you a combination of awareness and engagement.
Okay, so this section is called awareness and engagement versus lead generation. So I'm guessing with the enrollment challenges that schools have really faced this past year, leads are also really important, as always, right? So how do we turn these prospective students who are noticing our ads into actual leads? We don't just want them clicking an ad and then going away. We want the follow through.
Yeah. Once you have that really solid awareness and engagement strategy, you have to really think about their path after the click, or really when they visit your website, since the action that students were most likely to take after seeing an ad was to search for your school by name or visit your website directly.
Okay.
So they're not, you mentioned, they're not going to just come to your site and fill out an application on the first visit.
They're not.
No, and I like that would be the dream, right? If every student was just like, God, I love this, I'm just going to fill out an application right here.
Sure.
But they need to feel confident and they need to understand their choices, right? So Brenda talked about, the differentiators that so many schools can say they're affordable, they're flexible, they're small class sizes. So students are really trying to understand why are you a better choice than the other 2 or 3 schools that I'm considering? And we have to make sure that we understand that journey and that they can get to the answers they need and feel that confidence. And sometimes we have to invite them back again and again. So here's an example. Suppose that a student is scrolling through their Facebook feed and they see an ad for your school. They might not do anything immediately because they also notice that they just got a message from grandma. So they decide to respond to grandma first. And then they go and Google your school name and visit your site. They might visit a few pages. Maybe they look at a couple of degree programs. They look at a page about student life. Maybe they look at one for financial options. And then if they're really motivated, they might fill out a request for info. And that gives you the lead and you can nurture that through to the application. But maybe they don't. Maybe they're not ready to take action yet. They've got some questions still. That's where retargeting really becomes important, right? So when they bounce out after that last page that they went to, make sure you understand. Somebody leaving your website before filling out an application doesn't mean they're not interested. It means they still need more information. And so you have to understand the path. So look at your analytics. What is the path that students are taking? What pages do they visit? Especially new users, right? So I'm a new user. Where am I going? And then kind of find out when I come back, where do I go? And then employ retargeting, right? So make sure that you understand if I come back and visit, if I come to your site and I visit, a page on nursing, for example, or, if maybe I'm looking at financial aid options and I leave, think about retargeting me based on where I was. So if I'm looking at a nursing class, send me ads about your nursing program. If I'm looking at your financial aid page before I leave, maybe what you need to do is send me information about or retarget me with messaging about upcoming grant and scholarship deadlines, right? Give me some reason to come back and interact with you. And so when you think through creative keyword groups, calls to action, make sure that your message aligns with the path. Don't send a criminal justice program. If you have an ad for criminal justice, don't send them to your homepage and expect them to dig through all the pages of your site to find out about the criminal justice program. Send them right to the criminal justice page. And then make sure your request forms are easy to find. They're near the top of the page. And I know admissions recruiters often want a million fields because they want to really vet it out before they give it to someone to call back. But if you can keep your RFIs to 3 to 5 fields, that's best.
Yes.
And also, and if you don't have a chat feature, think about adding one, because we have seen stronger conversion rates from campaigns if live chat on the site is an option. And then you need to make sure that you follow up, right? So if once they become a lead, make sure someone is following up and continuing that experience. The way that they really want most frequently to be followed up is via email. So students have said they want to hear back quickly. They like email back because they can digest that in their own time. They also want to be able to find the information on your website. So make sure your website is easy to navigate. And then this past year, we saw increases in the number of students who said that they would like to hear back via either phone call or text message. So this is where really good collaboration between marketing and admissions is vital, so that the students who are when we reach out to the students, that we're giving them a consistent experience and we're giving them the information that they want.
Awesome. So I know we have a Q&A coming up in just a little bit. We're going to wrap up this section by talking a little bit about best practices on emerging platforms. So let's quickly go over this for them. I know you mentioned earlier that college students are more comfortable with new technology. So I'd like to know, how can schools make the most of these emerging platforms?
Yeah, so there's some really great ones. Really digital audio and video. And we saw how from the study, we saw how YouTube performed. Video is the way to go. It's the way that people are consuming media. And honestly, things like YouTube, streaming audio and over-the-top video services, those are growing, and younger consumers don't even understand traditional radio and TV. What I love about these is that it gives you all the influence and impact of radio and TV, but you can use that pinpoint targeting that digital gives us, right? So you can, instead of buying, a TV show or a radio station that was likely to be watched or listened to by a teen, but then paying for everyone, you can actually target teens specifically or target the parents of a high schooler, and all the impressions that you're getting go to the audience that you want.
And we know that they are spending a lot of time on YouTube. We know it.
Yeah, so much time.
So much.
It's actually the second largest search engine.
So something that I thought was kind of funny that we discussed, and I know you and I both agree on, but do teenagers even use Facebook? I know that's a question I get asked all the time by clients, by prospects. I want to know what you think, Heather, because I think we think the same thing. So tell us.
They do. Yeah, teenagers do use Facebook. They use it differently. But I've got research that says 5.7 million 15 to 17-year-olds across the country don't just have a profile, but they've actually used Facebook in the past month. So we know they're on there. They just tend to use it a little differently than adults. It's really like they consider it the grown-up platform. So they're going to go to it to connect with older relatives, or to learn about and connect with brands and organizations that they're interested in. And actually, a lot of students will connect with the school that they're considering on Facebook, because it's the platform that's been around the longest, and they feel more comfortable with it, and it allows for that engagement and connection. And students do see Facebook and Instagram as like more grown up.
Yeah, and I would say that also it's a great place to target their parents, right? So
absolutely.
That generation is definitely on Facebook. I'm not gonna name any people, but but yeah, definitely. So let's talk about Snapchat and TikTok, the newest babies.
So these are the newer social platforms. They're used more widely by younger generations, but they're also not quite as developed when it comes to advertising offerings. So Facebook and Instagram have more ad types and targeting ability and different things like that, just because they've been around longer and they've learned from their, the people who've advertised with them, from all of us, they've learned what works best, and they've developed ad types and things that work for us. Snapchat and TikTok are newer on the scene, and so they're still evolving their advertising offerings. But when you think about using that, you have to think about how is the audience using it. So when I use a Snapchat or TikTok platform, what am I consuming? Primarily, it's video based. So you have to be really comfortable with video to do Snapchat and TikTok, because that is what a consumer expects to receive when they're on there. And then you really need to keep up with them, because they're ever changing, right? They are evolving. They are finding ways to become more profitable and drive ad revenue like Facebook and Instagram already do. And so they're doing things like Snapchat had a lead ad type that they had in beta last year. It's not released yet, but because right now their success really comes from Snap ads and story ads. But a year from now, Snap and TikTok could both be doing different things and offering different ways for advertisers to connect. So it's really important to stay up to date with their current offerings. Then LinkedIn, this is the social network for professionals. So from a higher education standpoint, it's really great at helping us to connect with people who want to advance their career. So when you think about continuing education programs, graduate, advanced degrees, LinkedIn is the tool you want to use. You can target by job title, you can target by education level, and you can use a combination of in-mail and sponsored content ads.
I love that.
So one of my favorites is actually addressable digital. So this is really cool because geographic targeting is important, right? We all know we can't reach everyone, and on the internet, geography matters because you don't know who's visiting a particular site, whether they live in the area or not. So IP targeting has advantages and challenges. I think most of us know that. We know that not all IP addresses are accurate to like where you are. So sometimes you're getting people who are not in the market that you're trying to reach. Location-based geofencing is more accurate than IP targeting, but because of the way that the locations work, there are some areas where you've got people traveling in and out, and so you have waste. Or some areas might be protected because they're too close to areas where there's a lot of under 13. So for example, if you're trying to geofence a high school, but there's a middle school nearby, you can't geofence out of high school. So it gives you there's some limitations there. But the newer technology actually allows geofences to be built on property lines of a specific address. So it's a great way you can marry multiple tactics. So if you think about, like, you have a leads list and you're going to send them direct mail or email, you can take those same addresses and deploy mobile display and even OTT based on the address of that household.
Nice. So I'm going to bring it full circle for us. So I know that we talked a ton about a ton of different things and what this means for higher education marketers. Can you, within 1 minute, Heather, can you fill us in on what everything you just talked about means full circle before we get into our Q&A?
Yes, make sure that you and everyone who interacts with your prospective students knows your brand promise, and creates a good experience. Make sure that you understand the path that your specific students travel. So look at your Google Analytics, look at their journey, and make sure that you're moving them forward in the journey. And don't be afraid of new platforms and new technology. Your prospective students are there. You have to work with someone who understands those platforms to get in front of those students.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Heather. So now we're opening up the Q&A. If you want to send those questions in, we have a couple that have already come in. The first one is, any best practices for targeting or speaking to the parents of high school students? And if Kristen and Brenda want to come back on, or Heather, if you want to take this one to answer this one, by all means.
So I think from a targeting perspective, there's a lot of really great data points, right? So you can target, depending on the data partners that you work with, you can target parents of high schoolers. You can target households with teens. You can use a wide variety. They will respond email. We see email working really well with parents, and social, as you mentioned earlier, Facebook. But I think, honestly, if Brenda, I don't know if Brenda, I'm going to put her on the spot and ask her to chime in, because I think messaging is really what's important when you're connecting with parents.
Yeah, a lot of times, and thanks for that, Heather. A lot of times, we talk to both of them at the same time. We know that. And when we always talk at the end result to the student, but always over the shoulder of the parents. So yes, messaging is critical, because you can't do a separate campaign just for parents and a separate campaign just for students. That's just, not the best use of allocated budgets. So if you talk directly to the students, but always do that kind of, what it is that the brand has, and make sure that it's meaningful to the students themselves, the parents will engage and they'll get that. And of course, they're going to look for some of the things that might not be that upfront message, like what it costs. That's going to be back on the back end on the website, more information there. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, no.
And I think the value, when you think about the value proposition, especially from this most recent study, what the students are looking for, it's what the parents have always been looking for. What's the outcome? Is this going to help my child have a better future? So when you focus on outcome, it'll resonate with parents.
I love that. So we have another one from Keith, who says, we spend a lot of time targeting audiences to align messaging. How will the loss of cookies affect that activity? It's okay to say that we don't know.
I was going to say, this is one, actually, this came up recently, and I have a meeting coming up in a week or so where I'm going to connect with a client about it. I can't answer that question right now because I don't really know, but we all need to figure it out and figure out how to respond to it, because it will definitely affect the way that we approach things right now.
Sure. Okay, great. And I know that we kind of touched on this, Kristen, but we did have a question that came in that stated that you outlined the different purposes for campaigns: branding, awareness, consideration, intent, and commitment. For a small school with limited funding, we're wondering if you think it's important to cover all of these areas within a budget, or hone in on a need-based only.
Yeah, so I want to touch on one point from the previous question real quickly is, sure. Don't forget about your first party data. So there's a lot of ways that we can activate as marketers on your direct lists. We even activate on now leads that are created from your own search campaign. We can create lookalike audiences based on that. So don't forget that that information exists and is a really powerful way to target audiences. But so as for the question of what do we do, how do we prioritize budget, right? When we have a tiny budget, what do we do with that? And how do we cover the entire funnel? I will always advocate that the awareness stage of the funnel is just as important as the leads stage of the funnel or the conversion stage. Because if people do not know about you, they cannot fill out a lead or an application for your school. So, you know, I would do as much as you can within your budget to have some kind of presence always available for audiences. And then from there, be really on point with your targeting. Again, you know, there really are a lot of different ways that we can target. I think we really like the addressable targeting solutions that we have access to because that helps us kind of reach all of the influencers within a household and be really, really kind of granular and specific with who we're targeting, which is helpful from a conversion standpoint.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, and if you narrow your audience, as Kristen mentioned, narrow your audience and narrow your geography before you cut out like parts of the funnel.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. As a reminder, we will be giving out a recording of the webinar as well as a workbook at the end. You all will receive that later today or first thing tomorrow. Also, this was definitely the spearhead of releasing our newest study. So if you are looking to get that information out and you want to have a meeting, you want to find out more about our study that we just did with Gannett and Local IQ, where we really honed in on what marketers need to focus on, this is the absolute best time. So make sure that you do select yes, let's do it on that polling question. We'll also be sending you a survey after this webinar too, that's going to ask you a question about whether or not you're wanting to set up a time to review that. It's completely free. It doesn't cost you anything. So no harm, no foul, and finding out more information that's just going to improve you and your business. So we look forward to speaking to each and every one of you. Thank you guys so much again for taking the time out of your busy days to be on our call today. And thank you so much again to Heather, Brenda, and Kristen. I hope you all have a wonderful day. And we will see you guys in June for our next webinar. Thank you guys again. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.